Hi, friends. This is Ashley Latecki Ellenboss with Skyhouse Herb School and Apothecary. And I was sitting just thinking to myself, what should I record next? What is going to be a topic of value? And I was going through like all of these things like, oh, herbs for joint health, herbs for this and that. And they're helpful and useful, but I've been having this like, I don't know, stronger desire to share more and share deeper aspects of herbalism. So, normally I have a script. Today I'm going to just talk about the intersection of plants and spirituality and how herbs and using herbs can really open our eyes to a more spiritual dimension of life. So, I invite you to just have an open mind, and perhaps some of this information will be helpful. Maybe it will settle and sprout a little sprout inside of you, and maybe it won't. So uh, we'll see. We'll have to just see. I'll start by talking a little bit about how this has worked for me as an herbalist. For me, as a child, I've always been really nature oriented. For those of you who know astrology, I'm a sun and moon Taurus. So Taurus really is very active in my chart. And as a earth ruled sign, Tauruses love nature and the outdoors and the material world. And it's interesting because as I deepen my spiritual practices, I start to see a part of myself that's been so desirous and enraptured with the material world. And I see that it's in many ways been a gateway to the spiritual world. When I first started studying bhakti yoga, which is my spiritual path, I would feel so down because the material world is considered to be a lower form of energy than the spiritual world. And one of the things we try to do in bhakti yoga is work our way to being more interested, more focused, more in love with the spiritual world. And I always had this fear when I started, even just yoga in general, started embarking on yoga, that I'll never be very good at this because I like stuff. I like nature. I like pretty things. And so maybe I'm not cut out for this, which I think is part of what drove me so hard to study yoga, spirituality, and study a lot of different spiritual practices. It was this feeling like I'll always suck at it because of my material orientation. But that's changed because as I dive deeper into books like the Srimad Bhagavatam, even the Bhagavad Gita, and some of the other spiritual books, the Krishna books, um, is I'm starting to see that it's not that the material world is something we want to avoid. It just has a lot of traps and pitfalls that can get us stuck, and we can lose sight of the spiritual nature of the material world. And so when I was a child, I spent so much time outdoors. I loved climbing trees and making forts outside and creating little terrariums with moss and leaves and finding little, creatures to put inside the terrariums. And I would just stare at them for hours. And so the magic that it's almost like, this, when you're a child, the way that you view the world is very much non-material. There's magic like infused in everything you see as a child. If you can just put on your child goggles and just remember what it was like to be outdoors and to see things, or to venture out into the country, and what magic existed in prairies and forests and all of these places. And so as an adult now, I'm starting to reawaken and reorient myself to seeing the material world in this way. And this doesn't mean like I'm not into like Gucci handbags and that kind of material. For me, my material inclinations is really more like having lots of plants and lots of books and lots of nice clothes and things that I find really cozy and comfortable. um, so my love of plants really, I think, dovetails the material and the spiritual together, because one thing that I learned not that long ago, I believe it must have been in the last year, and it was just like blew my mind. And this was taught to me by one of my spiritual teachers, Hari Kirtana Das. And if you're looking for a spiritual teacher and you want to maybe join some online Zoom groups to study yoga philosophy and spirituality, I would definitely check him out. He is an incredible teacher and guide. So you can go to harikirtanadas.com or just Google Hari, Hari, Kirtana, Kirtana, and last name Das, Das. And so he once said that plants are people. And I was like, what? No, plants are plants and people are people. And he said, no, in the spiritual world, plants and all beings are persons. And so maybe they're not people per se. They're not humans, obviously, but they're persons in which they have a soul. So they are in-souled beings. Some of you might already know this, but to me, this was just like such a breakthrough, because I've always felt like plants have in them souls. They communicate. I can hear them. I when I sit with plants, there's this feeling. It's indescribable, but they are sentient and intelligent, and they communicate with us. And so when Hari said plants have souls, they're persons, just like I'm a person. And dogs are considered in the ancient yoga texts, dogs are persons. They have a soul. And we just incarnate in all these different bodies. So like I happen to be a person in a human body, and this plant is happens to be a person in a plant body, and we've got this different looking plant body. And so they're living sentient creatures. They've been embodied in a different way. And that really, I was like, I'm on the right path here, because I've always felt that way ever since I was a child, that all the trees and all the plants have a soul and they feel pain, which we know they do. If you've never read the book, The Secret Life of Plants, I strongly recommend that book, because there was this one study that showed they hooked up all these like sensors to plants, and their owners like traveled overseas. And when and so they hooked up these like little, yeah, like little, I don't know, micro little sensors, right? And so when the owners of the plants started coming home, and they hooked this up to people too, and then they documented all of it. But when the people started to head home and started thinking about their plants, the plants completely perked up. Like their whole they don't have a nervous system the way we do, but they do have a vascular and sort of chemical system that is akin to our nervous system. And so these little electrodes were like bing, 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 bing. Soon as they knew their owners were coming home and were thinking of them, like at that moment, like how, how does that happen in an airplane or, in another country? How do the plants feel that? So it's like, you probably have had the experience, I know I have, where I'm thinking about someone that I really care for, and then they call me and they're like, I was thinking about you too. So it's like souls communicate that way. Souls communicate not just verbally and by sound and by internet. We have this complex net of energy through which we communicate on a soul to soul level. And so when we think about the world in that way, sometimes I really feel like I'm not as good at communicating with persons in people bodies. And I feel much more comfortable when I'm by myself in the woods with plants. Or I like to be in big crowds of people where I don't have to talk to anyone, but like I'm surrounded by the energy of lots and lots of people, but I don't have that pressure to communicate with them other than just look at them and smile, because that's probably the most authentic thing I can do is just sit, look and smile and be like, I see you and you're pretty awesome, and then words get all clumsy and weird. So for those of us who feel that way, maybe we don't feel as comfortable interacting with persons in people bodies. Maybe we like persons in animal bodies, which I also feel like I can communicate better with than people. That plants can be a wonderful gateway into a spiritual relationship and starting to understand how subtle spiritual energy works. So let me maybe give us some examples. So one example, I guess, comes from my childhood was um, there was this tree at my elementary school. I went to Thunder Hill Elementary School in Columbia, Maryland. And there was this tree that would have these little berries. And it was a dogwood tree. I didn't know that at the time. But it had all these little areas where they had cut off the branches, and they looked like little mouths and little ears. And I got together some of my little friends. I think maybe I was in second grade or third grade. And I told them, I said, everyone, this is a magical tree. It will listen to you and it will tell you answers. Because I believed it was true. I had, been at this playground for many years, and I had just loved this tree, and it gave me this very calming presence. And I would just, every time I would walk by it, I would just be like, yeah, I see you. So I wanted my friends to experience this. And so I set up this game where there was an ear that the tree had. And so my friends would whisper their their question or something they wanted to say into the tree, and then I would put my ear against the tree and listen to what the tree had to say in response, and then I would tell them exactly what the tree said. Now, I mean, I don't know what my friend said to the tree. So whatever I said as a response to the tree, I don't know if it matched up, but I know that they loved the game, and we would hold hands. And after we were done asking questions, we would circle around the tree singing, Lemonberry, Yellowberry, we love you. Lemonberry, Yellowberry. And didn't actually have yellow berries, but we called it the lemonberry tree. I don't know. It maybe in a past incarnation it had yellow berries of some kind, or lemon. Maybe it was a lemon tree in a past body. But that was what we called it and what we sang to it. And it was such a fun game. And it was so real and so childlike and so innocent. But to me, it was just a way for me to connect with something larger than myself, connecting with nature and engaging in this form of communication that was non-linear and non-verbal. It was a different type of communicating that I've always been very uh interested in, and like it's always been a part of the way that I communicate. So that was just it was just enacting that. And I wonder if have you ever just hugged a tree, like as an adult in your adult body? I do, and I love it, and I always get something from it. And I was listening to this wonderful podcast that some of you might like called Wisdom of the Sages. It's a bhakti yoga podcast, and they're just really, really funny, down to earth yogis, and they have just such cool spiritual ways that they contextualize more mundane things in a more spiritual way. And so they were talking about how it's really hard to go to a tree, and I forget which of the two yogis were saying this. Maybe I think it was Raghunath Das. He was like, "Have you ever tried to like hug a tree and ask it for material things? Like it just doesn't work. Like if you go up to a tree and you ask it for spiritual things, it's like." Oh, like suddenly you light up and the tree lights up and there's this instant connection. But if you say, hey, I really want a new car, tree, could you help me? It's like, that's not how it works. Like the tree's not gonna that's like there's a dead end there. You've lost that open communication. But if you ask the tree, like, can you help me be a more loving human? Can you help me with my better understanding my relationship with God? Like, guess what? That tree is gonna be like, "Bzzz." It's gonna like tap right into your heart and give you like that boost of encouragement that you need. And so that is how we can use plants. There's I've got so many ideas and examples, but that's just one is like, hey, just go up to a tree and you don't it doesn't have to be an out loud thing. It can just be from your heart, like a heart to heart communication, like, hey, hi, and I like to call them brothers and sisters. So like, hi, Sister Cottonwood. Um, I need a hug today. Can I hug you? And most of the time, I've never had a tree say no unless there's something wrong with it or it's sick, but and then just give it a hug or just sit and lean your back against the tree trunk and just say, and just talk to it, like have a conversation and then close your eyes and listen and just see if you can hear back wisdom that comes back to you from the tree. And this is how the material is a conduit for the spiritual. Another example is drinking herbal teas. And this is something that if you've listened to my talks before and you listen to my channel, like I'm all about overnight infusions of herbs because not only do you get, I think, the most out of the plant, but it's a daily ritual practice that helps you to restore a lost connection with the plant world. And so I like to joke that the gateway herb is nettles. I mean, it's what I use in my herbal apprenticeship courses as the first herb that I have everyone do overnight infusions of for 2 weeks because it's a gateway herb. Like once you drink nettles for 2 weeks, I would say 90% of people, not 100% because it is hot and dry and some people energetically are just not a great match for it, in which case you could try oat straw. But, in general, nettles is a really great gate opener because it is so full of life. I mean, it's dark green, it's full of chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is only, one molecule off, or I think it's like one carbon off of our own blood, our own hemoglobin. So chlorophyll and hemoglobin are like, it's like the blood version for plants is chlorophyll. So we're getting like a lot of like that plant blood, but it's its vitality. It's the vitality of the plant. And nettles is also just high in minerals. It's anti-inflammatory. It's high in iron and potassium. Nettles is like mother's milk. It's very deeply nourishing for our body and our nervous system. It helps with allergies. It helps with joint pain, helps with Lyme disease. It's also really good for the immune system. So it has all of these incredible physical properties. But on a more energetic level, nettles is this green, prickly, Mars ruled plant that has such presence. I mean, if you walk by a patch of nettles and you accidentally bump against it, it's going to be like, yo, you're going to wish you didn't do that. Like, this is my space. Like, go to your own space, right? It has this very clear presence and sting that is, you can't get around it. And, uh, and so, because it has such a strong personality, for those of us who maybe are not as connected with the spiritual world or the subtler aspects of energetic matter, when we drink this plant, it's like, hello, I am in your body and I am interacting with you now. And it's just sort of this undeniable presence that you start to feel in your body. And it gives you strength and it gives you support and it gives you that fortitude and courage to go forward in your life. But we don't want it to just be something that helps us, just divide and conquer on a material level. If we go a little bit deeper with nettles and we actually sit with it and we let it sit in our mouths and we even maybe dare to meditate with that plant in our bodies, what we'll start to feel is that this plant, it has this way of nourishing us so that we feel loved again. I think that's the simplest way I can put it, is like you're worthy, you are here for a reason, and you are very, very loved. And the plant, like, boom, just sits you into that space if you really, really listen. And that's very encouraging on the spiritual path, because there's all of these things in culture that tell us that it's not real. If you can't see it, if you can't feel it, if you can't hear it, then it's not real. And it is real. The spiritual life is real. It's more real than the material. So we need to start to develop eyes to see that. And Nettles does that. Nettles gives us that deep feeling of being rooted in something bigger than ourselves. And that is just so invaluable. Um, and one more thing that I'll throw out before we will close today's talk is that our spiritual identity, we this was something else that Hari Kirtana Das, really taught me in a way that I'd never really gotten it, before he taught it, is that you are not your body. And I still, I still don't like that idea. It's a little uncomfortable to be like, what? I'm not my body? Okay. But the reality is that this body changes and it ages, and eventually I'm going to die. Eventually this body is going to fall off, and what's going to happen then? And I'm sure there's lots of religious practices out there, and I'm not saying you have to take mine on, but the thing that's made the most sense to me based on all of my past experiences is that the soul lives on after the body dies. And so, if we really, really take to heart that I am not my body, there's this great liberation that happens where suddenly the wrinkles and the physical discomforts don't become as limiting. They're just a part of the process of life and time and decay. And then this body, I had this image when I was a little girl. I had a dream before my grandmother died. She was killed by a drunk driver when I was 5. And I remember having this dream like a week before she died, that she was hit by a truck, and her body was like, she was like a big egg, and the egg cracked open and her soul floated up to the sky. And I remember telling my parents about that dream. And they kind of dismissed it. And then she was killed by a drunk driver, and left her body. And I was, of course I was sad. But I remember when my dad lifted me up to look in the coffin, and to look at her, I just knew she wasn't in there. I was only 5, but I was like, her soul went up. Like, this is just her body. It's just a shell. Her soul, my grandma Techie, this woman I loved, she was the most generous, soft little woman. I mean, she was only 5, I think she was 5 foot tall, and I'm only 5'2", and everyone else in my family is very tall. So I got her short genes, and I'm very grateful for that. And I just remember being like, yeah, she's gone somewhere else. And when I always felt like she's been with me ever since then. And when I got my first car when I was 16, I named it Chick, which was my grandmother's nickname, because I knew if I could remember her, her spirit would be with me. And you know that um that deep knowing is something that I think we are trained out of, and it's so unfortunate, because if we remember that we are just in these physical bodies for a short amount of time, and that once we're liberated from them, the soul continues on in so many different ways. It's really powerful. And I think about the plants too, and how they so easily shed their bodies. I mean, they have a different level of consciousness, sure, but also, I mean, plants drop their leaves, and there's no screaming or shrieking, or like, there's no palpable, if you sit underneath a tree while its leaves are dropping, it's very peaceful. It's a very peaceful way they let their bodies go until the spring comes and they grow new ones. And it's effortless when they grow their new leaves. And so we can be the same way. We can age in the same way and just let things drop away. The things I used to do. And as I think into my 60-year-old and 70-year-old body, how am I going to let go some of the activities and gifts of my body? How am I going to let them go? And gosh, if I can just embody that wisdom of the plants and let them just fall away and have this deep trust that I'll live again, that the soul will come back in a new form. And that form is going to be completely dependent on how I live my life in this body. So, there is something at stake with how I live and how I behave and how I treat others, and the level and the purity of my consciousness it will have an effect on the next body I take. And, I find that to be very inspiring. I find that to be very uplifting. So maybe you do too. Maybe you don't. I don't know. But I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you think of plants and herbs in a spiritual way? How have they helped you find meaning and hope? How have they heightened your spiritual awareness? I know in my last talk, interview with Marcy Moberg, my dear friend who's an incredible intuitive. It's like people like her that really live and communicate and in this very subtle way with energies and with people and all animals. We all have that capacity. It's just, are we using it? Are we honing it? Are we fine tuning it? And I'd love to hear how you might do that. Maybe different ways than ways that I've mentioned. So please give me feedback. I really, really do enjoy and love hearing what you have to say. So leave me a comment, give it a thumbs up if you liked this talk, share it with a friend if you think it might be helpful. And I will see you all on another day at another time. Bye.